next guest takes us behind the closed doors of a therapist's office in her new book, sharing the true stories of patients who impacted her the most during her time as a clinical psychologist.
In Good Morning Monster, 5 Heroic Journeys to Recovery, we see how these patients exhibited the utmost resilience in the face of trauma. Please join us in welcoming author Kathy Gildiner. Years of private practice, you whittled this whole thing down to 5 patients. You call those patients psychological heroes. What made them heroes in your eyes?
Well, I think a hero is somebody who overcomes incredible obstacles. And I thought of these 5 patients had more obstacles than anybody else I've had in therapy, who maintained their sanity. I mean, I've had other people who have not maintained their sanity, but these guys, you know, no matter how awful things got, they were somehow resilient. They somehow grabbed onto one little thing and said, I'm going to blow that up and make that work for me. So I think that that's heroic. You're like a prisoner of war, right? When you're in your family that's torturing you, right? And there's no way out, and there's no, employee benefits, and there's no veterans help.
So, as you're mentioning, all the people you're writing about in this book went through significant childhood trauma.
Yes.
So, understandably, they're angry. And you want them, or you say that they should lean into that anger, which is different from a lot of people and a lot of the language out there that is like, release your anger and let go of your anger. You disagree with that. Why?
Yeah, totally. Because I think anger has a bad rap. I think when people say let go of your anger, what they really mean is don't let go of your rage. You know, Columbine, all those things. I mean, that's rage. That's unleashed rage. But anger is something that actually helps you to keep on the track where you want to be. Like if you, for example, in the book, there is Danny, an indigenous man who lived in residential school from the age of 5 till 18, right? He was not allowed to be angry about anything, right? And so he had to even confess in confession every week that he was an Indian, right? That they absolutely brainwashed him. So he thought he could never express anger. But at his workplace, where he was probably 40 when I saw him, at his workplace, someone over the microphone every day said, "Hi, Tonto," to him. And he hated it. And then he was talking to me about it, and I said, well, why don't you get a little angry and say, I don't like that name, and I don't want you to use it again. You're 6'5". What's he going to do? Right? And so he said, no, I could never do that, because he had been trained very successfully by these priests and nuns to never express anger. And if you can't express anger, you can't express your needs, right?
Maybe not necessarily for Danny, but in the other patients that you discuss in your book, it was parents who were these people's biggest enemies in their lives, certainly through childhood as well. As a therapist, how do you walk the line and help them navigate between blaming and then accountability now as adults?
Well, I think you begin by blaming, and then you have to work through blaming, and then you have to talk about what those parents actually went through in their lives, right? And nobody wants to be a terrible parent. They're traumatized themselves, right? Or they're psychopathic, or something went terribly wrong. So you have to learn how to forgive them, and there's a big difference between forgiving them and being close to them and letting them do what they did before. But to just sort of say, I forgive you, but I can't be with you. You know, because if you carry anger and rage around at your parents, it weighs you down, and you can't get well yourself.
Back to Danny, just for a little bit, Kathy, who you said was indigenous. You got to a point where you knew that traditional white therapy was not going to work for him.
Right.
And so you then had to look for sufficient treatment for him. So talk about how you navigated this whole thing, this intersection between culture and therapy.
Well, when Danny came to me, he did not talk for 2 months in the therapy.
At all?
At all. He just sat there. Yet he was a long-distance truck driver and made all kinds of arrangements to be there every week on time. So I thought, well, this therapy is totally failing because he isn't saying anything. And then 5 years later, when we were talking about the beginning of our therapy, he said, that was the best time. I really got to know you then. So, I mean, it was a difference. It's a cultural difference. What I feel is silence. I feel, well, nothing's happening. Whereas silence for him was he felt he was really getting to know me and he was learning how to trust me. So, and then, his dreams were dreams of talking wolves, et cetera. I've seen a lot of Indigenous people, and they often have talking animal dreams, et cetera. And I realized, he was one of my first Indigenous patients, so I tried to find help because I thought, this is a very, very, very different culture. When he said to me he went to residential school, 40 years ago, I said to him, is that a boarding school? Like, we all know about this now. Then nobody knew anything. It was the first time that I'd heard of it. So, talk about a cultural gap. So I found a native, there was no native psychiatrist in Canada at the time. So I found one at Harvard who was actually from Canada, Dr. Brandt, and he told me everything that I had to do, right? And he said, he is not going to be healed by white therapy. You can teach him things. White therapy teaches you a lot. Like, it taught him how to express his anger. It taught him how to be in touch with his emotions. It taught him how not to blame himself and to stop blaming and saying, I shouldn't have done this. What made that priest come at me, instead of saying he did that to everyone. We didn't know that then, right? So all of that. But what Indigenous people need to heal is a spiritual component to the therapy. They have to be, when they go out, they have to feel at one with nature. They have to feel a spiritual sense when they're in the woods, et cetera. And white therapy doesn't offer that. We call you cured without any spiritual development, right? But it doesn't work for natives. He said he'll be like a donut with a huge hole. Right. So I then had to start investigating and going up north and doing smudges and all kinds of healing. But talking him into doing it was difficult.
With another one of your patients named Alana, you actually discuss in the book how your misdiagnosis actually led to you miss the warning signs of her suicide attempt. So, you're in a profession where the stakes are extraordinarily high. So how do you deal with the potential for failures as a therapist?
Right. I think you have to at least I look at therapy as like any other job. You're going to have some successes and you're going to have some failures. And the failures can be big. Fortunately, that was just a suicide attempt, right? And, not a full suicide. But you can't invest yourself as a priest or as someone who's dedicated to changing people. You have to say, this is my job. I'm going to intellectually look at it as a puzzle, and I'm going to try to fit all of the pieces in. Sometimes I'm successful at it, sometimes I'm not, right? And you can't blame yourself for every failure in the same way that, a kindergarten teacher can't blame herself for people that don't thrive in kindergarten.
Many therapists would say that they have the training, they have the experience, they could probably treat anyone and they don't have to like them.
Oh.
You think that's a lie.
Yeah, totally.
You think you have to like the person in order to be able to help them.
Or I have to learn to like them, one or the other. I know I've been to many therapist meetings where people have said, I can treat anyone, I don't have to like them. And maybe I'm transparent, and maybe I'm so transparent that people can pick up on that, right? But I believe you have to have a click with that therapist. You have to connect somehow. It's an emotional thing that they don't teach you in school, but you have to find that connection. If you don't, it peters out. Like within 2 or 3 weeks, they don't like you either. So they say, I think I'm fine now.
Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you.
The book is called Good Morning Monster, 5 Heroic Journeys to Recovery. And members of our studio audience, you're all going home with a copy today. We're back right after this.